Utah. We weren't going to leave you hanging. This is a really interesting year for Utah. I think it's the last year of the retool rebuild. I think the best case scenario for them, in my opinion, is they do what the Atlanta Hawks did, which was make the play-in, lose, and then you still are a lottery team. I mean, obviously Atlanta won the lottery, but just get a top 5 pick. Because I like Keontae George. We're going to find out if he's a true point guard or not. I think he's more of a shooting guard. But either way, I think he is a very capable player. I love Lauri Markkanen. And we need to figure out if Cody Williams and Taylor Hendricks are legit. Is Brees Sensabaugh legit? I think bringing in, Isaiah Collier falling to them works out great because, awesome. I really don't know what his potential is at this point, but I think for a guy who at one point was ranked as the number 1 player in his draft class, to end up on this team at the end of the first, that's pretty good value. Same thing with Kyle Filipowski. I like Svi Mykhailiuk. I think there's the bench with Drew Eubanks. There's legit guys. I know obviously Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, John Collins, and Walker Kessler more than likely are going to be traded. That's where, before we continue today's video, who do you guys expect to be traded? Who do you think is part of the future? Because I assume the pillars are Lauri Markkanen, Keontae George. They hope Cody Williams, Taylor Hendricks. Because if that's the case, if it can be Cody Williams, Taylor Hendricks, Lauri Markkanen, Keontae George, with George being the point guard, Keontae George being the point guard, Cody Williams being the shooting guard, Taylor Hendricks being small forward, Lauri being the power forward, I guess Walker Kessler the center. And then you run Drew Eubanks, John Collins off the bench. This is the dream scenario if everything works out and a year or two down the road, if that for some reason this team stayed intact. But again, I do believe Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson are the two guys that they're going to look for. And I think if you look at this year's upcoming draft, go check out my mock draft either here or just on Hoops Hype, but you can read it. I think they're a team that would benefit getting a top 5 pick, either getting Nolan Traore or a Dylan Harper on this team. Even a Trey Johnson or a VJ Edgecombe would really, really help this team, I think, tremendously in terms of, or an Igor Demon. Just guys like that, a couple of real table setters if Keontae George doesn't work out. And that's I think what we're figuring out this year is them just figuring out who's going to be that guy, who isn't. And I think there's a lot of potential to see how this team grows and if they're going to be capable of, again, I think they're going to surprise people a lot more than you'd think, in my opinion at least. I personally think the way they look at this is, I think the last 2 years there's been points of the season where the Jazz were competitive and it looked like they could, if they wanted to, make a play-in run, but then they let the bottom fall out and they just remain a lottery team. Maybe that happens again because they do have some guys, but I think they really do want to move off of Collins and Sexton and Clarkson for sure. We're hearing the Kessler stuff, and it just makes sense because I think they rather Kessler's going into year 3, and they don't want to be the ones who give Kessler the contract. I understand that. I think they want to figure out, do we have a point guard, or is this draft us figure out who's our point guard? No offense to George. I love George, and I think he's a good cornerstone. I think he's more of a shooting guard. I think Lowry's the power forward. Now or is Lowry your small forward? I think he is your power forward. You get a different center. I think Taylor Hendricks, where does he fit in there is the big thing. Sensabaugh. I think Cody Williams can be the small forward, and that's what they're trying to figure out right now. So bringing in, Eubanks on a 2-year, $10 million, I think gives them just a solid center. The Johnny Juzang's just been a good story for them, and we know they've been in a holding pattern regarding what they've done, and we're waiting because based on what they did by spending that money, they've reached the salary floor. So for the Utah Jazz this upcoming year, I think it's just trying to figure out which players I think Keontae George for sure is part of this. I think Cody Williams for sure is part of this. And I like to think that Taylor Hendricks is there, but it's a weird fit right now. So I think they're trying to figure out of Sensabaugh, Hendricks, Collier, Johnny Juzang, all 3 two-way guys. Who's actually a part of this future, like realistically? Also, I thought I started playing these highlights way earlier, and I think that's the biggest thing for them is just trying to figure out, okay, where do we go from here now with the Utah Jazz? I like to think that what they were looking at is just trying to build their assets. And I think that's where you look at their future draft picks. What do they look? Because look at, I don't think the Celtics ever with Danny Ainge let the bottom fall out, and the Jazz own the Cavaliers and the Timberwolves pick in this year's draft. But the thing is with their 2025 pick, it's currently protected 1 through 10 by for OKC or against OKC. So OKC gets the pick if it's outside of 10. And if it doesn't convey in 2025, it's top 8 protected in 2026. So if by then Utah's obligation, let me just put it this way, Utah does not control their pick for the next 2 years. So Utah, arguably, you could say, for the next 2 seasons would like to be bad because they want to be a bottom 8 team in the league or have the best odds to get a bottom 8 pick for the next 2 years. This year, bottom 10, and the following year, bottom 8, because then they get to keep their pick, not have to give it to OKC. And if it does not convey to OKC by 2026, then their obligation to OKC will be extinguished. And that is due to the fact that that's just how the language of that trade. So in their best interest, they either want to be bad for the next 2 years or be bad this year and the next year be good enough where they don't care that they lose a pick that's in the 20s. So again, they're incentivized to just be bad, and they're going to go into this next draft with 3 first-round picks, 1 from the Cleveland, 1 from Minnesota. So I would not be surprised if that at this point you look at their team, and we've shown you what that roster looks like. If they do package a pick, Minnesota's or Cleveland's or somebody's with a different for somebody who could become available. Now, NBA trade candidates this season are going to be interesting, as I think it's going to be a little bit different. I really do. I think some of the guys that are going to become available for them, it's going to be hard to decide who those players will be, because your assumption is it's got to be a young guy. It's not like they're going to go after Kyle Kuzma. It doesn't make sense. Nor does an Anthony Simons or DeAndre Ayton, Cam Johnson. Those are just guys who are paid already. Like I think they'll trade for someone who hasn't been paid already, that they'd be the ones to pay him. Sure, I could see that being the case, or even trading for a guy like Wendell Carter Jr. I think they want to. I also would not be surprised if they're in the market for a point guard and they start to look for somebody. We've heard the Brandon Ingram. I just think, again, the Minnesota Cleveland deal picks would be used for a deal of Brandon Ingram. But again, the other thing, and I don't mean to say, but again, the whole thing when you do a deal like that is, are you going to be fine with trading and accelerating your timeline? That's the whole thing.